Whale with millions of parasites asks for help. Then the fisherman. Frank Miller breathed in the salty air of that warm morning in Cape Harbor, his old boat drifting slowly through the turquoise waters that had been his refuge and livelihood for 40 years. The 68-year-old fisherman had set out earlier than the others, as he always did since his wife Margaret had passed away, leaving only memories and an empty house. That's when something happened that in 4 decades at sea he had never witnessed. A massive humpback whale slowly surfaced beside his boat, so close that Frank could have touched it by reaching out his arm. The water parted majestically to make way for the sea giant, spraying crystal droplets that reflected the light of the rising sun. What struck the old fisherman most wasn't the whale's majestic size, but its pitiful condition. Its surface was covered in yellowish parasites that coated much of its body, forming grotesque bumps that disfigured its once elegant silhouette. In some areas, the skin looked irritated and wounded, with reddish patches signaling infection. The animal's gaze fixed on Frank with unsettling intensity, as if pleading for help, its dark eyes conveying an ancient, profound pain that transcended the barriers between species. "Good heavens!" Frank exclaimed, gripping the side of the boat to steady himself. The whale didn't move, staying there, floating calmly beside the boat, as if waiting for something. Frank realized the creature could easily capsize his small vessel with a single motion, yet instead, it seemed to be deliberately revealing itself, exposing its wounds and parasites. "You're asking for my help, aren't you?" the fisherman whispered, cautiously extending his hand to touch the whale's surface. At the human contact, the animal let out a soft sound, almost a moan, that reverberated through the water and into the old man's chest. In that moment, without a single word exchanged, a silent pact formed between the lonely fisherman and the wounded whale. Frank knew what he was about to do would change his life completely. Giving up fishing to help a whale would be seen as madness by the small fishing community. But that gaze had pierced his hardened soul. "I'll help you," he promised, determined. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way." When he returned to the dock, the fisherman went straight to the small town library, a place he rarely visited. Mrs. Jenkins, the retired librarian who voluntarily kept the place running, pushed up her thick glasses and watched curiously as the calloused man nervously flipped through books on marine biology. "Looking for something specific, Mr. Miller?" she asked, stepping closer with slow strides. "Need to know about parasites on whales," he replied without lifting his eyes from the pages. "Saw one today, covered in 'em. Never seen anything like it." Mrs. Jenkins adjusted her glasses on her thin nose. "Parasites on whales, that's Dr. Catherine's field. She's the one who donated these books, you know. Worked her whole life with marine mammals before retiring and moving here." Frank finally looked up. "Catherine Wells? The woman who bought the lighthouse house?" "The very one. They say she came here after some accident during research. Doesn't talk much about it. Lives alone just with those cats and her books." The fisherman shut the book firmly. If anyone could help that whale, it was a specialist, even if she was a recluse who avoided the community. The path to the lighthouse house was steep and rarely used. The century-old building had been restored, but still carried an air of isolation that matched its current owner's reputation. Frank knocked on the door 3 times, before a woman with graying hair and a stern expression answered. "What do you want?" she asked, not fully opening the door. "Are you Dr. Catherine Wells? I'm Frank Miller, a fisherman. I need your help." "I don't see patients anymore, Mr. Miller. Not humans, not animals." She started to close the door, but Frank was quick. "It's about a humpback whale covered in parasites. I've never seen so many. She came right up to my boat today like she was asking for help." The woman's distant eyes suddenly focused on him with sharp interest. "What kind of parasites?" "Yellowish, like little barnacles, but different. They cover nearly half her body." Catherine hesitated, conflict clear on her face. Behind her thin-framed glasses, her eyes revealed an inner struggle. Frank noticed for the first time that they were eyes that had seen too much, maybe more than they should have. The scientist's graying hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her hands, though aged, had the steadiness of decades in the field, touching, measuring, saving. "Mr. Miller, even if I wanted to help, what can we do?" Her voice, once cold and distant, now carried a frustration Frank recognized. We're just two people against millions of parasites on a ton-sized animal that lives in the ocean. No specialized equipment, no team, no funding. She stopped, as if a painful thought had crossed her mind. "I don't know, Doctor," Frank said, his voice steady, not pleading, just stating a fact. "All I know is I promised her I'd help, and a man doesn't go back on his word. My father taught me that when I was 7, and I've never broken that rule." The determination in the fisherman's simple words seemed to strike something in the scientist. For a fleeting moment, Frank glimpsed in her eyes something he recognized immediately, the same fire that had once burned in his own chest before life and its losses had dulled it. Catherine sighed deeply, adjusting her glasses in a gesture that seemed more habit than necessity. "Come back tomorrow. I'll need to see this whale." Then, almost whispering to herself, maybe there's still a way to make a difference." The next day, against her better judgment, Catherine found herself on Frank's small boat, armed with a waterproof camera and basic collection tools. The sea was calm, nearly flat, mirroring the cloudless blue sky. "Are you sure she'll show up?" Catherine asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "She will," Frank replied with a confidence even he didn't understand. "I can feel it." And as if answering the call, the massive humpback surfaced in the exact same spot as the day before. Catherine was speechless. The whale was in far worse shape than she'd imagined. These weren't just ordinary parasites. It was a severe infestation of a type she'd rarely seen in such numbers. "Coronulidae barnacles," she murmured, snapping photos frantically. "And cyamids too, but in alarming concentration. This isn't normal." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. "What does that mean?" Frank asked, watching as the whale seemed to recognize him, edging even closer to the boat. "It means she's in trouble. These parasites are hindering her ability to swim efficiently and probably causing constant pain." Catherine studied the whale with growing concern. "But what puzzles me most is her behavior. Whales don't usually seek out humans for help." "This one did," Frank stated firmly. "She chose me." For 2 hours, Catherine photographed, collected water samples nearby, and took detailed notes while Frank remained silent, simply observing the interaction between the scientist and the animal. The whale, surprisingly cooperative, allowed Catherine to approach for her observations. "Mr. Miller, we need expert help," concluded Catherine when they finally returned to the dock. "I know people at the Green Whale Institute in Long Beach who might have treatment equipment." "I'll make some calls." Frank nodded, his determination unwavering. "How much will it cost?" The question caught Catherine off guard. "A lot. More than a fisherman and a retired scientist can afford." "I'll find a way," he replied simply. The next morning, the small dock at Cape Harbor was buzzing with the news. Old Frank had put his boat up for sale. The Hope, the vessel that bore the name of his late wife and had been his livelihood for decades, now had a makeshift sign announcing its sale. Howard Reynolds, owner of the largest fishing company in the region and an influential figure in local politics, watched the scene suspiciously from his office window overlooking the dock. "What's that old man up to?" he asked his assistant. "First he stops delivering fish, then he's seen with that crazy scientist from the lighthouse, and now he wants to sell his boat? They say he found a sick whale and is obsessed with saving." "It, Mr. Reynolds," replied the assistant, a thin young man who knew all the village gossip. "People are already calling him the crazy whale man in the chatter." Howard narrowed his eyes, his interest now fully piqued. "A whale? Where exactly?" "At Lighthouse Cove, from what I hear. Right near the area where you plan to expand fishing. Next summer." Howard stood abruptly. "Get my car. I'm paying our fisherman friend a visit." Frank was organizing his fishing gear when a luxurious pickup truck parked in front of his modest wooden house. Howard, dressed in expensive clothes that contrasted with the simple surroundings, approached with a calculated smile. "Frank, my old friend, it's been too long since we last talked." The fisherman rose slowly, wiping his hands on the rag he always carried in his pocket. "What do you want, Howard? You were never one for social visits." The businessman laughed as if it were some grand joke between friends. Straight to the point as always. I heard you're selling the Hope. I came to offer a fair price. After all, we're practically family, aren't we? How long have we worked together? 20 years? 23, Frank corrected, not matching the false enthusiasm. And I don't recall ever considering you family. Howard's smile faded slightly. I've also heard some interesting stories about you and a certain whale. Frank showed no surprise. In a small village like Cape Harbor, news traveled faster than the wind. What's it to you? Come on, Frank, be reasonable. You're 68, living alone, and now you're selling your only means of income to help a wild animal? People are worried. I'm worried. I didn't ask for anyone's concern. Howard sighed, partially dropping the friendly facade. That's an important fishing area, and you know it. If word gets out about an endangered whale there, we could have trouble with environmental authorities, NGOs, the press. It would be bad for everyone's business. Frank crossed his arms. What exactly are you trying to say, Howard? I'm saying I'll buy your boat for a good price, enough for you to live comfortably the rest of your life. In return, forget this whale. Business? Frank studied the man before him. Howard Reynolds, who had started as a simple fish merchant decades ago, now commanded a small empire in the region. His once jovial face had turned into a mask of ambition, with eyes that calculated profits and losses even during casual conversation. Frank briefly remembered how years ago they had almost been friends, sharing coffee on the dock while discussing fishing routes. How time and money changed people. It's not for sale to you, Frank replied without hesitation, feeling the firmness in his own voice, a determination he hadn't recognized in himself for a long time. And the whale isn't just a story. She's real, she's suffering, and I'm going to help her with or without your permission. Howard's face hardened, the mask of politeness completely gone. You've always been stubborn, Frank. That's what drove your son away, wasn't it? That stupid stubbornness of yours? And now you're going to throw away what little you have left in life over an animal. The mention of his son hit Frank like a physical punch, but he kept his expression steady. This conversation is over, Howard. You know the way out. This won't end well for you, the businessman warned, heading back to his car. Think about what I said. My offer won't stand forever. As soon as Howard left, Frank sat down on the porch chair, feeling the weight of the years and the businessman's words. It was true. His stubbornness had contributed to the estrangement from his only son, Michael. 15 years without a word, ever since that terrible argument where unforgivable things were said. 15 years trying to gather the courage to apologize. The rarely used landline rang inside the house, pulling him from his painful memories. Hello? Mr. Miller? It's Catherine, I have news. The scientist's voice sounded excited. I got in touch with a team that specializes in whale rescues. They're interested in the case, but they need more evidence, scientific documentation. And how do we get that? We need to monitor the whale daily, document the progression of the infestation, her behavior, movement patterns. Basically, build a strong enough case to justify an expensive intervention. Frank thought for a moment. I'll need a boat for that. I thought you were selling yours. Changed my mind. Some things don't have a price, Doctor. In the days that followed, Frank and Catherine established a routine. Every morning they went out on the Hope to find the whale, who seemed to wait for them in the same spot. Catherine taught the fisherman how to use a waterproof digital camera, and together they began compiling a detailed record of the animal's condition. It was during one of these trips that Catherine made an alarming discovery. Frank, look at this, she called, pointing to images on the camera's small monitor. See this swollen area on her side? And the shape of her body? I'm almost certain. Of what? She's pregnant. Catherine's eyes shone with a mix of scientific excitement and concern. This explains why she's so desperate for help. It's not just for her, it's for her calf too. The news struck Frank deeply. This wasn't just a sick whale, it was a mother fighting to protect her unborn baby. The revelation gave their mission a new sense of urgency. How long until she gives birth? Hard to say without proper equipment, but by the looks of it, I'd guess a few months. The problem is her condition is worsening fast. The parasites are affecting her ability to feed properly, and a pregnant whale needs enormous amounts of food. In the village, news about the crazy whale man spread and divided opinions. Some mocked Frank, calling him senile or desperate for attention. Others, especially the younger ones, began showing interest and support for his cause. Amanda, the local schoolteacher, asked Frank to talk to her students about the whale. At first reluctant, the fisherman eventually agreed and was surprised by the children's enthusiasm. One of them, Ethan, just 10 years old, had an idea that would change the course of the story. "Mr. Frank, why don't you put the whale photos online? My older brother says things get famous there." The seemingly simple suggestion led to the creation of a rudimentary blog. With Catherine's technical help and the school children's enthusiasm, as the first followers, the whale's photos and stories began circulating beyond Cape Harbor. In just 1 week, the blog Frank's Whale had reached visitors across the United States and started attracting international attention. News website reporters reached out, environmentalists offered guidance, and a small fundraising campaign began spontaneously when Catherine mentioned the potential treatment costs in a post. Howard Reynolds watched this movement with growing irritation. The presence of a pregnant, sick humpback whale in the cove, where he planned to expand his fishing operations, was a problem. The media attention was an even bigger one. When a wildlife protection agency inspector showed up at his office asking about local fishing practices, Howard decided it was time to act. The businessman called an emergency meeting of the Community Fishing Council, where he held considerable influence. "Friends, we're facing a concerning situation," he began once all council members were present. "Frank Miller's erratic behavior is putting our entire fishing community at risk." "How so, Howard?" questioned Hank, one of the oldest fishermen on the council. "He's drawing too much attention to our waters. We already have Wildlife Protection Agency inspectors sniffing around, asking about permits, questioning our fishing zones, and all because of this obsession with a whale." "But the whale really is sick," another council member remarked. "My nephew showed me the photos on that blog. The poor thing's in terrible shape." Howard slammed the table impatiently. "That's not our problem. We're fishermen, not whale vets. And while this nonsense continues, our families could face fishing restrictions. We're talking about our livelihoods." With carefully prepared arguments, Howard convinced the council to temporarily suspend Frank's fishing license, citing behavior that jeopardizes the reputation and operations of the local fishing community. "It's for his own good," Howard justified, pleased with his victory. "The old man needs to focus on his own life, not wild creatures." When Frank received the official notice from the council, his first impulse was to confront Howard. Catherine, however, convinced him to focus on what really mattered. "The fishing license isn't important right now, Frank. You're not fishing anyway, and the blog is generating enough donations to cover your basic expenses for now." "It's not about the money, Dr. Catherine. It's about honor. That scoundrel is trying to stop me from helping the whale." "And why?" Catherine asked thoughtfully. "Why would he care so much?" "There's something else going on." The answer came unexpectedly through Jason, the son of one of the council fishermen. The teenager sought Frank out the next morning, nervous and constantly looking over his shoulder. "Mr. Frank, I heard my dad talking with other fishermen last night. Howard Reynolds has plans for that cove. He got some kind of permit for exclusive tourist development in the area. He's going to build a complex with a private marina and boat tours." Frank and Catherine exchanged knowing glances. "So that's it," murmured the scientist. "If there's a pregnant and threatened humpback whale in that area, the permit would be revoked," Frank completed. "And if she's pregnant, the area could even be declared a temporary sanctuary." The discovery of Howard's true motivations only strengthened Frank's resolve. With Catherine's help, he intensified the online campaign, now with a clear goal: to raise enough funds to bring in a specialized team before the whale's condition worsened beyond recovery. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The blog caught the attention of an international marine life protection NGO, which sent a representative to assess the situation firsthand. Dr. Robert Tanner, a marine biologist with extensive experience in aquatic mammal rescues, arrived in Cape Harbor on a rainy August morning. "I came as soon as I saw Dr. Wells' reports," he explained to Frank as they walked along the dock toward the Hope. "Cases like this are rare, and this whale's behavior is exceptional. She's literally asking for human help. When they finally spotted the whale that morning, even in the steady rain, the animal's condition shocked even the experienced Dr. Tanner. The infestation is progressing rapidly, he confirmed after examining her with the advanced equipment he'd brought. And as Dr. Wells suspected, she's definitely pregnant. We need to act fast. What can we do? Asked Frank, his heart tightening at the whale's increasingly evident suffering. There's a relatively new procedure developed by colleagues in Canada. It involves a specific chemical treatment for these parasites and mechanical cleaning of the skin. But it's complicated, expensive, and we'd need specialized equipment, a larger vessel, and a trained team. How much would all that cost? Catherine's question was direct. Considering equipment, transport, personnel, logistics, at least $200,000. The amount was astronomical for a retired fisherman and a reclusive scientist. Even with the blog's donations, they were far from that sum. I'll get that money, Frank declared, with the same unshakable determination he'd shown from the start. That night, alone in his small house, Frank made a difficult decision. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he'd kept tucked away in his drawer for years. Blue Coast Realty? I want to put my house up for sale. Yes, urgently. As soon as possible. The news that the old fisherman was selling not just his boat but also his home to save a whale spread through the village like wildfire. To some, it was final proof of his madness. To others, an act of heroism worthy of admiration. When Catherine heard of his decision, she confronted him immediately. "Frank, you can't do this. Where will you live?" "I'll manage, Doctor. I have fishing buddies who can take me in for a while. The important thing is getting the money for the treatment before it's too late." "But it's your home. The place where you lived with your wife, where you raised your son." The mention of his son made Frank look away. "It's just a house. Doctor, wood and concrete. The whale is alive, suffering, waiting for our help. And it's not just her, it's her calf too." Catherine studied the old fisherman with a mix of admiration and concern. "Why is this so important to you, Frank? Why this particular whale?" The man fell silent for a long moment, as if organizing thoughts he'd never put into words. "When Margaret was sick in her last months, she said she saw a whale from the hospital window. I knew it was impossible. The hospital doesn't face the ocean. I thought it was the medication, the advanced illness." His voice wavered slightly. "On the day she left, she asked me to take care of the whale. 'Don't let her suffer alone,' were her last words. I never understood, until now." Catherine had no answer for that revelation. In silence, she placed a hand on the fisherman's shoulder in a rare gesture of human connection. "We'll find another way," she finally promised. "You won't lose your home." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next day, as Frank prepared his boat for another visit to the whale, he was surprised by an unusual group at the dock. The children from Amanda's school, led by little Ethan, carrying colorful signs and a giant ceramic. "Piggy bank. Mr. Frank, Mr. Frank," they chanted in unison. "We have a surprise for you." The fisherman watched, confused, as the children arranged themselves in a semicircle in front of him. Ethan, visibly nervous but determined, stepped forward. "Mr. Frank, we heard you're selling your house to save the whale, so we decided to help. We had a fundraiser at school and managed—" The boy glanced at his teacher, who nodded encouragingly. "We raised $342.75. The children clapped enthusiastically, proud of their achievement. The amount was insignificant compared to what was needed, but the meaning behind it struck Frank deeply. "And we also made these signs to put up in the square," Ethan continued, holding up posters with drawings of whales and slogans like "Help Mr. Frank's whale" and "Save Mama Whale and her baby." Frank felt a lump in his throat. In all, his years of self-imposed isolation after Margaret's death, he never imagined he'd inspire such kindness, especially from children who barely knew him. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. This means a lot." Amanda, the teacher, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "The children had another idea, Mr. Frank. They want to organize an event in the square, next Sunday, a kind of festival to raise money for the whale. What do you think?" Before he could answer, Catherine arrived at the dock, accompanied by Dr. Tanner, and surprisingly, a man Frank immediately recognized as a reporter from the regional TV station. "Frank!" Catherine called, visibly excited. "Our blog was featured on Coastal TV's morning show today. They want to do a special report on the whale." The reporter stepped forward, extending his hand. "Brian Thompson, Coastal TV. Your story is incredible, Mr. Frank. A retired fisherman willing to sell his home to save a pregnant whale? It's the kind of story people need to hear." The sudden attention made Frank uneasy, but he understood the value of the opportunity. The more people who knew about the whale, the better the chances of getting the help they needed. The report aired that same night, and the impact was immediate. The blog saw an unprecedented surge in visitors, donations began pouring in, and the phone wouldn't stop ringing with people offering all kinds of help. Then at noon the next day, a completely unexpected visitor. Howard Reynolds showed up at Frank's door, this time without the fake smile, without his assistant, without his usual air of superiority. He looked tired and irritated. "We need to talk, Frank," he said bluntly. "We have nothing to talk about, Howard. I have a proposal, one you'll want to hear." Reluctantly, Frank let the businessman inside. "I'm listening. I'll fund the whale's treatment, all of it. The 200,000 equipment specialists, whatever it takes." Frank narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "And what do you want in return?" "That you leave Cape Harbor after everything is settled, sell your house, take the money, and go live somewhere else, far from here." The offer was as unexpected as it was insulting. "Why would I do that?" Howard sighed, running a hand through his graying hair in a gesture of impatience. "Because it's best for everyone, Frank. You get what you want, the whale gets treated. I get what I want, to continue my business without interference, and you still walk away with the money from your house sale." "What are you hiding, Howard? Why are you so insistent on pushing me away from that cove?" The businessman hesitated, clearly conflicted before making a decision. "They found oil, Frank. Not much, but enough to justify a small extraction operation. I have interested investors, permits nearly approved. It would be discreet. No one would even notice." "Oil?" Frank couldn't believe it. "In Lighthouse Cove? What about environmental permits? The Marine Reserve?" "I have connections, Frank. The project would be presented as oceanographic research at first. Later, well, things happen. And if I refuse your offer?" Howard's expression hardened. "Then you'll find out that a retired fisherman and a handful of kids with signs are no match for determined businessmen. Think about it, Frank. I'm offering a way out where everyone wins." After Howard left, Frank remained motionless in the small living room of his house for long minutes. The revelation about the oil explained a lot. Howard's insistence, the rush to push him away from the area, the suspension of his fishing license. His first impulse was to share the information with Catherine and Dr. Tanner, but something stopped him. Without concrete proof, it would just be the word of an old fisherman against an influential businessman. He needed more. That night, as he organized his fishing gear, Frank heard hesitant knocks at his door. When he opened it, he found Jason, the fisherman's son from the council, accompanied by a middle-aged man who looked vaguely familiar. "Mr. Miller, this is my uncle Hank. He works at the City Hall office in the Urban Planning and Environmental Department." Hank shook Frank's hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, I saw the news story about you and the whale. What you're doing is admirable. But there's something you need to know, something I can't ignore any longer." The man opened a folder and pulled out copies of official documents. "These are environmental permit requests for oceanographic research and non-invasive mineral prospecting in Lighthouse Cove. They were submitted by Blue Coast Ventures, Howard's real estate company," Frank recognized. "Actually, a front company. The real applicant is a consortium that includes an international oil corporation." Hank flipped through more documents. "The worst part is that preliminary studies already indicated a high potential for environmental impact, but those reports were conveniently lost and replaced with watered-down versions. That's illegal. Completely. And I can't be complicit through silence anymore. Not after seeing that news report, not after understanding what's really at stake." That night, in the small town library, An unlikely group gathered: Frank, Catherine, Dr. Tanner, Hank from the environmental department, Amanda, and a few fishermen who had decided to support the whale's cause. With these documents, Dr. Tanner explained after reviewing the material Hank brought, we have enough grounds to request a formal investigation by federal environmental agencies. But it'll take time. The whale doesn't have that time, Catherine reminded them. Her condition is worsening fast, and the calf's birth is getting closer. What if we accepted Howard's offer? Frank suggested unexpectedly. He pays for the whale's treatment, and we buy time to expose his illegal plans. We can't trust him, argued Catherine. And you'd have to leave Cape Harbor, your home, everything. Frank shrugged. Home is where the heart is, Doctor. And part of my heart is with that whale now. It was Amanda who offered an alternative. What if we held the fundraiser festival anyway? With the TV coverage, the documents Vicente brought, and the growing support online, we could raise enough funds and expose Howard's plans at the same time. Amanda's plan was unanimously approved. The Floating Humpback Whale Festival was scheduled for the following Sunday, with family-friendly activities, live music, food prepared by the students' mothers, and a detailed exhibit on the whale's condition and the importance of preserving that marine area. We're turning this into a movement, declared Catherine, with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. It's not just about a whale anymore. It's about our community, our ocean, our future. The week leading up to the festival was filled with intense preparation. The central square of Cape Harbor was transformed with marine-themed decorations made by the children. Local fishermen, many initially skeptical, began to get involved, offering boat rides as raffle prizes for the fundraiser. Shopkeepers donated food and drinks to be sold, with all proceeds going to the whale's treatment. On the eve of the event, as they finalized preparations, Frank was surprised by the arrival of an official letter. The mailman, who rarely visited his street, seemed particularly pleased to deliver it. This had been sitting at the main post office for weeks, Mr. Miller. Came from far away with an incomplete address. It only got here because of the TV report. I recognized you. Frank examined the envelope curiously. The postmark showed it was from Sydney, Australia, and the handwriting. The handwriting was Michael's, his son. With trembling hands, he carefully opened the envelope, both dreading and longing for its contents. Dad, I don't know if this letter will reach you, or if you'll even be willing to read it after all this time. I've tried to reach out over the years, but my earlier letters came back unanswered. I've been in Sydney for 5 years working in marine conservation. Ironically, I ended up on a path you would have approved of, though at the time of our separation it seemed impossible. I heard from Aunt Sarah that you kept fishing alone after Mom left. I want to say I understand your choices now, though back then I was too young, too impulsive to see beyond my own pain and ambition. I have a son now, your grandson Tommy. He's 3 and loves the ocean, just like you always have. I tell him stories about his fisherman grandfather, the man who knew the sea like the back of his hand. I plan to visit the US at the end of this year. I'd like to see you, if you're open to it. Not for blame or grudges, I've long moved past that, but to rebuild a bridge that never should have been broken. Whether you respond or not, know you've always been and always will be my father, with all that entails. With love, Michael. Frank sank into the nearest chair, the letter shaking in his hands. 15 years. 15 years of silence, regret, unspoken words, and now this. A grandson. He had a grandson named Tommy who loved the ocean. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. Michael's letter, the festival the next day, the whale waiting for rescue, it all swirled in his mind like stormy waves. Before. Dawn, unable to stay in bed, he did what he always did when he needed to think. He went to the sea. The sky was just beginning to lighten as he reached his boat. The sea was strangely calm, almost flat, reflecting the gradient of colors at dawn. Without much thought, he started the engine and headed toward Lighthouse Cove, the place where it all began. The whale was there as if waiting for him, despite the unusual hour. Frank turned off the engine and let the boat drift slowly until it was close to the enormous animal. "Hello, old friend," he whispered, observing the whale's visibly worsening condition. The parasite infestation had spread, and the creature looked thinner, less energetic than before. "I brought news. My son wrote to me. I have a grandson, can you believe it? His name is Tommy, and he loves the sea, just like me." The whale moved, slightly edging closer to the boat, its eye fixed on Frank as always. "Tomorrow's the big day, the festival. We'll get help for you and your calf, I promise. Just hold on a little longer." As if understanding his words, the whale let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh, that reverberated through the water and touched the old fisherman's heart. It was then that Frank noticed something in the water. A small orange buoy that hadn't been there before, attached to a cable that descended into the depths. Intrigued, he cautiously approached. The buoy had an inscription in English: "Petroleum Survey Point 3, do not remove." "Damn it," Frank muttered, anger rising in his chest. "He's already started." With renewed determination, he grabbed his IZT camera and documented the buoy, its location, the markings. The morning mist was beginning to lift, allowing the sun to illuminate that strange object that didn't belong in those sacred waters. Frank took photos from multiple angles, making sure to capture the coordinates on the boat's GPS and the proximity to the area where the whale usually stayed. Howard Reynolds had begun his operation in secret, without waiting for final permits. It was a blatant violation, exactly the kind of evidence they needed. A movement in the water caught his attention. The whale surfaced briefly a few feet from the buoy, as if also curious about the strange object. Frank noticed the animal seemed more agitated than usual, perhaps disturbed by the intruder in its sanctuary. "Don't worry," he murmured to the whale. "I won't let them destroy your home. That's a promise." With the vow made, Frank started the engine and hurried back to the dock with renewed urgency. As the boat cut through the water, his mind raced feverishly, connecting dots, forming strategies. If Howard had already begun installing equipment, it meant he was certain of final approval, or worse, he didn't care about it. Either way, time was running out. When he returned to the dock, he was met by Catherine, who looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her usually composed face was pale, with deep circles under her reddened eyes. Her hands, always steady, even during the most delicate procedures with the whale, trembled visibly. "Where were you? I've been looking." "Everywhere." Her voice was a mix of relief and restrained panic. "What happened?" Frank felt a tightness in his chest, a sense that the worst was yet to come. "They vandalized everything, Frank," Catherine said, swallowing hard, the words seeming physically painful. "The posters, the festival decorations, all destroyed. Like a hurricane swept through the square overnight." The fisherman's blood ran cold. "Howard!" "Who else?" Catherine sighed, exhausted. "But that's not all. We got an email from the Green Whale Institute. They're worried about the media attention the case is getting. They think we're sensationalizing the situation and that it could harm future conservation efforts. They've withdrawn their support for the treatment." "He bought them, too," Frank concluded bitterly. "How far does his reach go?" "The festival is cancelled, at least for now. The city revoked our permit to use the square, citing public safety concerns." Frank looked at his camera, the images from the research buoy still fresh in his mind. "No, Doctor, we're not giving up. I found something this morning that changes everything." The photos from the research buoy were immediately sent to Vicente at City Hall and reporter Brian Thompson from Coastal TV. The evidence that operations had already begun, without full authorization, was exactly what they needed to expose Howard Reynolds' illegal plans. As they waited for the reaction to these discoveries, another surprise. Dr. Tanner returned from a quick trip to Long Beach with exciting news. "I convinced my old university to fund part of the treatment as a research project," he announced. "Plate it. It doesn't cover everything, but it's a good start." "How much is left?" asked Frank, hopeful for the first time in days. "We still need about $90,000. It was a considerable sum, but significantly less than the original amount. With the donations already received through the blog and the funds promised by local businesses for the cancelled festival, they were closer than ever." That's when Amanda, the teacher, had a brilliant idea. "What if we hold the festival anyway, not in the square but at sea? A flotilla of boats, all decorated with music, food, everything we planned, but on the ocean, near the whale." The suggestion was bold but perfect. They wouldn't need city approval to sail in waters that rightfully belonged to everyone. "A floating humpback whale festival," exclaimed Dr. Tanner, excited. That would draw even more attention. It'd be a one-of-a-kind event. Organizing the festival at sea required completely different logistics. Local fishermen offered their boats, nautical tourism businesses joined the cause, promising to take visitors to see the whale from a safe distance, as Catherine advised. Musicians volunteered to play on an improvised raft, and the students' families adjusted their plans to prepare food that could be easily transported and eaten on the boats. What seemed like a setback turned into something even better than the original plan. The floating festival captured the imagination of the state media, ensuring even broader coverage. Boat tour reservations sold out quickly, and donations began pouring in from across the country. On the eve of the event, as final preparations were being completed, Howard Reynolds made one last desperate attempt. He showed up at the dock where Frank was preparing his boat, accompanied by two men in suits who looked like lawyers. "This has to stop, Frank," he demanded, visibly agitated. "You have no idea what forces you're messing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Howard. I saw your oil research, boys. I photographed everything." Howard visibly paled. "You don't understand, it's not just local business. There are international investors, million-dollar contracts at stake, and a pregnant, sick whale you'd be willing to sacrifice for profit. Not to mention the environmental impact on the entire coast. Last chance, Frank, take my offer. $200,000 for the treatment, you leave Cape Harbor, and we forget all this." No. The simplicity of the answer seemed to completely unravel the businessman. "You'll regret this," he threatened, but without his earlier conviction. "All of you will." Frank watched Howard walk away, noticing how his shoulders seemed slumped, defeated. For the first time, he felt a pang of pity for the man who had been his boss for so many years. Howard was a prisoner of his own greed, unable to see beyond immediate profit. The morning of the festival dawned glorious. The sky was a crystal blue, the sea calm as a mirror. Dozens of boats decorated with colorful ribbons and signs supporting the whale formed an impressive flotilla in Lighthouse Cove. The central barge, where musical performances and charity auctions would take place, was anchored strategically, visible from all the smaller boats. Frank, aboard the Hope, felt an indescribable emotion seeing so many people gathered for a cause that had begun as his solitary commitment. Catherine, usually reserved, couldn't contain her smile at the success of the mobilization. "I never imagined we'd see something like this," she confessed, watching the boats arrive one after another. "It's almost a miracle." "It's not a miracle, Doctor. It's what happens when people come together for something worthwhile." The festival was proceeding with enormous success. The musical performances filled the air with joyful melodies. The auctions of items donated by local artists and merchants raised surprising amounts, and the guided whale-watching tours, always at a safe distance with a limited number of boats at a time, thrilled visitors of all ages. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the middle of the afternoon, during a break between performances, Dr. Tanner stepped onto the small makeshift stage on the central barge, accompanied by Frank and Catherine. A gradual silence settled over the boats, everyone eager for the announcement they knew was coming. "Friends," the biologist began, his amplified voice reaching even the farthest boats. "Today we've witnessed something extraordinary, not just the mobilization of an entire community to save a humpback whale and her unborn calf, but also proof that when we unite for a just cause, we can overcome any obstacle." Enthusiastic applause temporarily interrupted his speech. "It is my immense pleasure to announce that, thanks to the generosity of all of you, today's auctions, the online donations, and the support of California Coastal University, which has decided to become an official partner of the project, we've raised not just the remaining $90,000 we needed, but a total of $120,000. The explosion of joy was deafening. Boat horns blared, people cheered and applauded, some even jumping into the water in spontaneous celebration. "This means," Dr. Tanner continued when the noise subsided slightly, that we can not only begin treating the whale immediately, but also establish a continuous monitoring program for her and her calf after birth. Plus, the surplus will go toward creating a permanent fund for marine mammal protection across the entire region. More applause, more celebration. Frank, usually reserved, couldn't hold back the tears streaming down his face, weathered by sun and time. Then, a Wildlife Protection Agency patrol boat appeared on the horizon, approaching the festive flotilla quickly. Many feared they'd come to shut down the event, but the reality was even more surprising. The boat docked beside the central barge, and 3 uniformed officers disembarked, along with a man in civilian clothes whom Frank recognized immediately. It was Brian Thompson, the reporter from Coastal TV. The journalist took the microphone, his serious expression contrasting with the celebratory atmosphere. "Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for a moment of your attention for an important announcement." He paused dramatically, looking directly at the cameras broadcasting the event live. "I've just accompanied a Wildlife Protection Agency operation that has resulted in the immediate suspension of all research and prospecting activities in Lighthouse Cove and adjacent areas." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. "Based on photographic evidence provided by Mr. Frank Miller," continued the reporter, gesturing toward the fisherman, "and internal documents submitted by town hall employees, an illegal preliminary exploration operation has been confirmed, lacking proper environmental permits and the required impact studies mandated by law." It was then that one of the Wildlife Protection Agency agents took the floor. "In addition to suspending activities, we are initiating proceedings to declare this area a special marine mammal protection zone on an emergency basis due to the presence of the pregnant humpback whale and the ecological importance of the region." The news was met with even more enthusiastic applause than the announcement of the successful fundraiser. It was a double victory. Not only would they save the whale and her calf, but the entire local marine ecosystem would also be protected. As the celebration continued, Frank quietly slipped away in his boat, heading toward the spot where the whale usually stayed. He needed to see her, to share the news, even though he knew the animal likely wouldn't understand his words. The whale was there as always, though she seemed weaker than in previous days. The treatment couldn't have come at a better time. "We did it, my friend," Frank whispered, leaning over the edge of the boat. "The treatments start tomorrow. You and your calf will be just fine." As if she understood, the whale drew closer, her enormous eye fixed on the old fisherman, conveying what he could only interpret as gratitude. "And you know what? My son is coming home. I have a grandson. Maybe one day I can bring him here to meet you and your little one." He was interrupted by the sound of an approaching engine. Turning, he saw a fishing boat he didn't immediately recognize. As it drew nearer, he made out the lone figure at the helm, a middle-aged man, dark hair, streaked with gray skin bronzed by the sun. The boat stopped a few yards from the Hope. The man remained still for a few seconds, just watching, before finally speaking. "Dad?" Frank felt the world stop. That voice, deeper, more mature than in his memories, was unmistakable. A whirlwind of emotions surged through him. Joy, fear, shame, hope, all competing for space in his chest, which suddenly felt too small to contain what he was feeling. "Michael." His voice came out shaky, almost a whisper carried by the wind. There was no rush forward, no dramatic embrace, just 2 men, separated by 15 years and a few yards of seawater, staring at each other with a mix of shock, apprehension, and restrained hope. Time seemed frozen between them, as if the entire universe had paused to witness this reunion, orchestrated by fate. Frank studied his son, searching for the young man in his 20s who had left on a rainy morning after that terrible argument. In his place stood a mature man, with faint streaks of gray at his temples, and lines on his face that spoke of experiences, joys and sorrows his father had not shared. He wore simple but good quality clothes, khaki pants and a navy blue short-sleeved shirt that accentuated his tan, earned on seas in another hemisphere. His shoulders were broader, his posture more confident, but his eyes His eyes were still Margaret's. "I got your letter," Frank managed to say at last, his voice barely a whisper, heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words over 15 long years. "I didn't expect a reply so soon," Michael answered, a hesitant smile appearing on his lips, briefly revealing that dimple on the left side, a trait inherited from Margaret, one that had always melted Frank's heart when he saw it on his little boy. "But then I saw online a fisherman from Cape Harbor and a whale. I knew it had to be you. The most stubborn man on the US coast, fighting alone against the whole world for a cause others would have abandoned. How did you get here?" "So fast from Australia. I've been in the United States for 2 weeks, Dad. For a conference in New York, I was trying to gather the courage to come here." The two boats were now side by side, separated only by the width of an outstretched arm. Frank noticed his son had wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, just like Margaret used to have. "You look like your mother," he said, his voice choked. "And you're exactly the same," replied Michael, equally moved. "Stubborn as ever, I see, fighting alone against businessmen and authorities for a whale." "I'm not alone. Not anymore." It was then that the whale, as if sensing the moment, emerged between the two boats, its massive body partially revealing itself above the surface in a majestic motion. Father and son watched in reverent silence, sharing their first moment together in 15 years, in the presence of that gentle ocean giant. "She's pregnant," Frank explained when the whale submerged again. "And sick. Those parasites are consuming her." Michael nodded. His marine biologist eyes had already assessed the situation. "I saw the photos on your blog. It's a severe case, but treatable with the right protocols." He hesitated before continuing. "Actually, this is exactly the kind of treatment I've been working on in Australia." Frank looked at his son with astonishment and newfound understanding. You could help?" "Dad," Michael smiled, now without hesitation. "That's why I came." In the days that followed, a new routine settled in Cape Harbor. Michael, with his international experience in marine mammal treatment, naturally took the lead in the operation alongside Dr. Tanner. Specialized equipment arrived. A technical team was assembled, and the whale's treatment began with renewed enthusiasm. Frank, always present, watched his son's work with pride. The decades of distance and resentment seemed to gradually melt away, replaced by a carefully nurtured mutual respect. "The treatment is working," Michael announced after a week of daily interventions. "The infestation is receding, and she's responding well. We still have a long way to go, but the outlook is positive." Every morning, father and son went out together on the Hope, accompanied by the technical team in larger boats. The afternoons were spent in Frank's small house, where the past was carefully unearthed, old wounds examined in the light of mature perspectives, and bridges slowly rebuilt. "Why did you never answer my letters?" Michael asked one of those afternoons as they shared coffee on the porch, watching the distant sea. Frank sighed deeply. "I never got them, son. None of them until this last one." Michael looked genuinely surprised. "How is that possible? I sent at least one a year, always to this same address." The answer came unexpectedly from the local mailman who happened to be passing by the street at that very moment and overheard part of the conversation. "Mr. Miller, remember that issue with the mail a few years back? The old mailman was a drunk, you know. They found out he was throwing away whole bags of letters. He was fired for good cause, I thought you knew." The revelation struck father and son like lightning. 15 years of silence, of distance, of growing bitterness, all because of lost letters, of words that never reached their destinations. "All this time," Frank murmured, stunned. "I thought you hated me, that you'd never forgiven." "Me," Michael confessed, equally shaken. Every year without a reply seemed to confirm it. That night, seated at the simple kitchen table, father and son wept together, not just for the lost decades, but for the unexpected chance at redemption that a sick whale had indirectly given them. "And Tommy?" asked Frank when the emotions had settled a bit. "My grandson, he didn't come with you. He stayed with his mother in Sydney, but I promised to bring him to visit the United States, to meet the fisherman grandfather I'm always telling him stories about during his next school break. Does he really love the sea?" The question carried the full weight of family heritage, of the tradition Frank had feared was broken. Michael smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. He was practically born in the water, Dad. By 3, he swam better than most adults. And he keeps begging to see whales. He'll love hearing his grandfather saved one. Frank felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. Life had come full circle. The lonely fisherman, the sick whale, the lost and now found son. The grandson he'd never met, but who already carried the ocean's call in his blood. The whale's recovery progressed steadily in the following weeks. The parasites began to fall away, treated with a combination of medication applied directly to its skin and a special ultrasound device Michael had brought from Australia. The whale, growing more active, seemed to recognize its rescuers, willingly approaching for daily treatments. Meanwhile, Howard Reynolds' situation deteriorated rapidly. With his illegal operation exposed and permits suspended, investors withdrew their support. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a corruption probe involving local officials, and the businessman became a recluse, rarely seen in the village. The transformation of Lighthouse Cove into a protection zone was made official, ensuring the area's preservation for future generations. The movement to save a single whale had evolved into a permanent shift in the community's relationship with its marine ecosystem. Then, on a particularly beautiful September morning, as treatment neared its final phase, the miracle everyone had secretly hoped for happened. Frank and Michael had set out earlier than usual, taking advantage of the favorable tide. The whale, now visibly healthier, with large patches of its skin completely free of parasites, wasn't in its usual spot. "Maybe it finally left," Michael suggested, his voice tinged with both sadness and professional pride. "That would be a good sign. It'd mean it's strong enough to resume its migration." Frank nodded, feeling the same mix of relief and loss. "We did what we promised. It's free now." They were about to turn back when movement in the water caught their attention. The whale surfaced about 50 meters from the boat, but it wasn't alone. Beside it, much smaller but perfectly formed, swam a calf. "Good heavens!" Michael exclaimed, instinctively grabbing his camera. "She gave birth!" Frank couldn't speak, his throat tight with emotion. The birth had happened naturally, without human intervention, a final testament to the magnificent animal's resilience. The mother whale, as if formally introducing her calf, swam slowly toward the Hope, the baby following faithfully. When they were close enough, both lifted their heads above the surface, their eyes fixed on the two men. The calf, curiously, fearless, flicked its tiny tail, creating ripples in the crystal-clear water. Its skin was a flawless blue-black, free of parasites, glistening in the sun like wet silk. The mother, visibly healthier, still bore some marks of her past suffering, scars that told her story of resilience. "She's thanking us," whispered Frank, tears streaming freely down his weathered face, each wrinkle a testament to the years and struggles that had brought him to this moment. "She's showing us it was all worth it, that every sacrifice had its purpose." Michael, equally moved, placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Every effort, every fight was worth it. Father and son stood there, witnessing the miracle of life they had helped preserve, bound not just by blood, but by the shared experience of salvation and rebirth. The news of the birth spread quickly. Journalists returned to Cape Harbor, this time not to document a desperate struggle to save a sick whale, but to celebrate a new beginning. The calf, perfectly healthy, became a symbol of hope and the power of collective determination. At an impromptu but moving ceremony on the beach, the community decided to officially name the mother and calf. "The mother will be Hope, like the boat that found her," declared Amanda, the schoolteacher, as the children cheered enthusiastically. "And the calf will be Tommy, like Mr. Frank's grandson, who will one day come to meet him." Frank, usually reserved in public, let Michael embrace him in front of everyone, his heart overflowing with a joy he never thought he'd feel again. In the months that followed, Michael split his time between Cape Harbor and his commitments in Australia, gradually preparing to move permanently to the United States. The story of Hope the whale and little Tommy had captured the attention of the international scientific community, opening doors for research funding in the region. Frank, though officially retired from commercial fishing, found a new calling as a guide for responsible whale-watching ecotourism. His deep knowledge of the sea, combined with his fame as the man who saved the whale, made him an attraction in his own right. Howard Reynolds, after months of investigations and legal proceedings, was convicted of environmental crimes and corruption. His company went bankrupt, and he left Cape Harbor quietly, a broken man consumed by greed. Lighthouse Cove, now officially part of the Cape Harbor Marine Reserve, became a destination for researchers and tourists interested in conservation. A small visitor center was built, where the story of Hope and Tommy and the community that came together to save them was shared. And on the porch of his small, carefully restored wooden house, Frank Miller sat every afternoon, watching the sea that had been his lifelong companion. Hope and her calf Tommy had left months ago, following their migratory instinct. But the old fisherman knew they would return next season. Humpback whales always come back to the places where they feel safe. The letter in his hand was from Michael, confirming the arrival date with little Tommy, his 4-year-old grandson who would finally meet him. The attached photos showed a bright-eyed boy with a wide smile, proudly holding up a child's drawing of a whale. Frank smiled, carefully folding the letter. Life had a surprising way of coming full circle. The lonely fisherman who had risked everything to save a whale had ended up saving not just the animal, but an entire ecosystem, a community, and most importantly, his own family. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky and sea in shades of orange and pink, Frank closed, his eyes in silent gratitude. The whale had asked for his help, and in answering that call he had found not just purpose, but a redemption he never believed he deserved. Somewhere in the vast ocean, Hope and Tommy swam free, healthy, and safe. And soon, in the small fisherman's house in Cape Harbor, another Tommy would arrive, completing the circle of salvation and renewal that had begun with the unlikely encounter between a man and a whale. The end of the story. Dear listener, has this story touched your heart? Share your emotions in the comments and tell us if you've ever witnessed such a special family reunion. Subscribe to the channel for more uplifting stories and leave a like if you believe in nature's power to transform lives.